At this stage, I never really know if people are still listening or just the people who think they might have money are watching this. Not really sure. Doesn't really matter that much. I'm going to make it anyway. Pool is done, season's done, so let's get right after it. Before we get to pool results, I have a few things to say about the Super Bowl, and probably if you care a lot about the sport, you're going to find way other people to say things. But I think for us and for me, I'm looking at not just as a fan, because I'm not really a Seahawks fan, and I certainly wasn't cheering for the Patriots, but just a fan of football and honestly of fantasy football. You start looking at implications. And the funny thing about this particular game is it really mirrors the sport. If you look at like people who had huge bowl games in college and how much that impacts their draft status, it's kind of the same in the big playoff or the Super Bowl moments is even though it's a game, and in this case, not a great one, it is going to change narratives, right? How many times when we look at like Hall of Fame, which obviously came up in the last couple of weeks with Belichick and all that, how many times to return to how many Super Bowls did they make and win and, big performances versus kind of horrible performances. So next year's fantasy, I'm very, very interested. I mean, obviously, I don't think it impacts Drake May that much. He was as successful with his feet as he was with his arm. And I think if you're a supporter, you can really kind of draw his whole postseason, or especially the Super Bowl, to he probably had that bum shoulder and he was missing a ton of people, but he didn't do it that often during the year. He did play pretty crappy in the first half of most of his games, at least as a thrower, but then he stepped up and was a great deep ball thrower, so who knows. But the crazy part was he actually did leave the playoffs in turnovers, and I think it's an all-time stat. Sacks as well. Sacks not as much his problem. Turnovers definitely his problem. Whereas Darnold, his season walking in, and everyone talked about how he had the most turnovers of the year, and then Seahawks didn't have like any. He's a bit too old. I mean, this is the first ever, I believe, and you can fact check me, the first ever quarterback to win the Super Bowl on his fifth team. His story is pretty well known. I don't know if that changes his draft status either to start off the year. The big names, it doesn't so much, but honestly, New England running backs, yeah, I think Travion and Ramondre, I think that puts a few question marks in the mix. Walker, free agency, we don't know, but obviously having an epic last game against a team that was supposed to be great against the run. But ultimately, I think we can overhype it because May is still good, but they're also going to have a way tougher schedule next year. So I think New England's just going to have to get used to it. And New England fans are just going to have to deal with it. They made it to Super Bowl before they were supposed to. And now they're going to have a really tough schedule. And if they still have a great year, then they were right all along and their team was ready. And if not, I mean, see Cincinnati Bengals and see what happened to them and what still happens to them. So I do think the coaching situation and their depth is a little bit different, but it'll be interesting because obviously they've shown if you don't develop your line, you are in trouble. I think the other thing it also makes me think of is just how crappy some of the games were this year. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't rewatch most of the AFC side games, but most of the NFC I would rewatch if I could, especially the actual best game. And we said it even when it happened, Rams Seahawks. That was pretty entertaining. I'd watch that one again. Super Bowl, I watched the halftime show again. I have no interest in watching 15 total punts. 15 total punts. And I know we have a punter in the pool, so maybe you want to go back as a punting clinic. Michael Dixon probably could have been the MVP, and if you just before you Google it, that is the punter of the Seahawks. Phenomenal game, and I definitely think it was worth, I guess, if you care about punting angles and rolling balls out of bounds or sticking it within the 10-yard line, 15-yard line. I don't know. One of the only funny parts about rewatching would be you'd have to sit through Shanahan. It's so like, I hate the word cucked, but it kind of applies here because it was in San Francisco. They got him to come on and he had to do nothing but compliment the Seahawks who shelved him this year. I mean, that's got to burn. Anyway, I could keep going, obviously, but I won't. Let's jump to the pool. We'll get to the results and wrap this thing up. Don't know why I'm starting at the bottom other than just to say I guess last year's champion was this year's tied for 23rd. So hey folks, it can happen. It can get given and taken away. But congratulations. I'm going to say congratulations to our top 4. I think in the previous week or two I said 3, but I checked last year's payouts, which this is why you write things down, kiddos. Paid out last 4, and since we had one more than last year, that's not enough to add. I do have a number in my head. Once you get there, then we add more people in terms of the pay route. In this case, we didn't really add a person at all. We just add to Corbin's paycheck. So congratulations on the 2nd and the 4th. That's pretty amazing. I know you would have rather had a big punch here and taken home the title, but hey, 2 paying spots out of your 2 brackets. not too shabby. Huge congrats, Ben. I know often we end up just exchanging back and forth with pools that we run. In this case, I think you're taking home some prize, so we'll be in touch, and congratulations on the W. Jake, I know you were otherwise occupied. For those who do not realize, Jake is now with child. Not in the pregnant way, but in the actual has a kid now way. I said that the weirdest possible way. Apologies, Jake. But anyway, not only do you have that, you have a third place finish, which is not the priority, but it is a little bit extra cash. So, hey, could be a lot worse. For those who just like to look at the stats like me, so quarterback, May did score enough in the Super Bowl to get him as our QB1 for this pool's breakdown of points. Now, you could also check out, though, he didn't have the best couple rounds, so you could make the argument of having Allen and then flipping to either him or Darnold, because they actually scored the same, Darnold actually scored more, so he would have been the better option. So you could have avoided the QB1 and still probably scored out once either Stafford or Allen were eliminated. But for those who took the May Stafford right off the bat, I mean, you didn't have to mess around. You got the 71 points. Congrats. Walker, weirdly enough, walked away with this one. And if we go in terms of the numbers, he wasn't the most popular, but he was one of the more popular ones. Henderson has to be the biggest bust on this. More people took Henderson than Stevenson, and Stevenson was the RB3. Now, he didn't really have any monster games, and just barely in the last one, kind of climbed over CMC. You'll notice this really presented an odd one for those who are thinking in the future. Is it better to take a backup running back on a team that goes all the way? Or is it better to take somebody who's great who only lasts a couple weeks? In this case, the Swift and CMC people are probably pretty happy. In terms of the wide receiver, Puka Nacua, not surprisingly, he was going to be our number one all the way through. Now, JSN could have put up a fight if he didn't get in a fight with the blue tent, and we hope he's okay. This was not a great position in general. If we look, just a lot of mush in the middle. I mean, Cooper Kupp ended up being a huge pick for those who had him. Nobody had any of these people in the middle. Well, Kincaid, some people did, so huge pickup for Kincaid for those who wanted those points. Adams obviously helped out. Nobody took Kirk. Nobody took DJ Moore. Nobody took Mims. At the end, we had some add-ons. So realistically, maybe in the future, you can take a few rolls of the dice when it comes to wide receiver. Although, if you didn't have Puka Nacua, Puka Nacua. I say Puka way too much. Puka Nacua, if you didn't have him, you probably missed out and you probably were not in the top 5. For those still with me here, I mean, if you've watched this for those still with me, if you watch this far, maybe you'll listen to 45 seconds longer. Thanks for coming into the pool. Always appreciate it. Kind of that low, the nicotine patch of the cigarette smokers that is fantasy football. It gives us something to hedge us off. But now we're entering the most exciting part of the year. Baseball's around the corner. NBA and NHL going full blast. And don't forget, you're all going to hear from me in about a month and a bit's time, because the madness is ready to start. Thanks for joining this year, crew. Hope to see you again next year, or just in March.